It starts like any other day in court, just another case on the docket. Another defendant standing before the bench. But when a powerful white judge thinks he can frame a black woman for a crime she didn't commit, he doesn't realize he's chosen the wrong target. Because she's not just any woman, she's an undercover FBI agent, and she's been watching him longer than he knows. What follows is a collision between corruption and justice. A battle where every move could be the last. And trust me, you won't believe how this story ends. Before we dive in, let us know what time is it where you're listening, and where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment below. We read every one. And if stories like this hit home, be sure to like, subscribe, and stay with us, because this is one fight you don't want to miss. In the heart of New Orleans, where the Mississippi winds through the soul of the city, the courthouse on Royal Street stands tall, its marble columns a cold reminder of the power held inside. This was no ordinary day in that courtroom. The air hung thick with tension as Judge Harrison Wolfe adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, silver hair slicked back like he was some king presiding over his domain. The kind of king who ruled not with mercy, but with an iron gavel that crushed anyone who dared to meet his gaze. Monica Price stood there, wrists shackled in front of her, calm eyes locked onto Wolfe's face. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. 34 years old, with dark brown skin and braided hair pulled back tight, Monica stood taller than her 5'7" frame. She wore an orange jumpsuit like it was armor, but beneath that steely stare there was fire. Not the kind that burned wild, but the kind that smolders, waiting for the right moment to ignite. Judge Wolfe tapped his gavel once. The echo bounced off the courtroom walls, silencing the murmurs of those gathered reporters, lawyers, and a smattering of locals who'd wandered in for the show. His voice, smooth like aged whiskey, rolled out over the crowd. "Monica Price," he drawled, leaning forward with a smile that never quite touched his eyes. "You stand convicted of aggravated assault, of causing harm to an innocent man on Bourbon Street, and though your lawyer tried spinning tales of mistaken identity, I see through the smoke. This city doesn't tolerate violence, and it certainly won't tolerate the likes of you running wild in our streets. The likes of you." The words sank heavy, weighted with a history that everyone in that courtroom felt. A black woman, standing before a white judge in the Deep South. History repeats itself, doesn't it? Wolfe's smile widened, slow and deliberate. 15 years. No parole. The courtroom gasped. Even the prosecutor, playing his part in this charade, shifted in his seat. 15 years? For a bar fight that Monica never touched? No one even claimed there was a weapon involved. But Wolfe didn't care. He saw what he wanted to see: a black woman who wouldn't bow her head. That was enough. Monica didn't move. Her chest rose and fell steady, her eyes never leaving Wolfe's face. Inside, though, she could feel her pulse hammering in her ears. This was the moment they'd prepared for. The fall before the strike. See, Monica Price wasn't some street hustler. She wasn't even who Wolfe thought she was. She was a federal agent, FBI, undercover for the last 2 years, digging into Wolfe's backroom dealings, his bribes, his hidden empire built on the backs of black men and women he'd sentenced without mercy. She'd posed as a temp at the courthouse, cleaning offices late at night, slipping into Wolfe's chambers when no one was watching. She'd planted listening devices in his golf bag, hidden cameras behind his bookshelf, fake invoices, and bribery records right under his nose. She'd smiled at him in the hallway, knowing every smug smirk he gave her would soon come back to haunt him. This courtroom scene? This sentence? It was part of the plan. Take the hit. Get locked up. Let the FBI swoop in with warrants and rip Wolfe's empire apart from the inside. Her handler, Elliot Banks, had promised it'd all go down by nightfall. Extraction would be swift. She'd be out of those cuffs, and Wolf would be in them. The years of digging, risking everything it was all about to pay off. But as the deputies hauled her toward the door, Wolf leaned back in his leather chair, sipping from a glass of bourbon hidden just below the bench. The smirk he gave her one last time wasn't just arrogance. It was something else. Suspicion. The kind that curls in your gut when a predator senses his prey isn't quite what it seems. The gavel cracked once more, signaling the end. Wolf watched her go, his blue eyes narrowing behind those glasses. Monica didn't show it, but she felt that flicker of doubt from him. He'd handed down sentences like this for decades, padded his bank account with kickbacks from the private prison industry, all while wrapping himself in the robe of justice. He'd built a fortress of power, each stone cemented by the lives he'd ruined. But today was supposed to be the start of his downfall. Still, as the heavy doors swung shut behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling, that look Wolf gave her, that twitch of unease. Her hands clenched into fists, cold steel biting her wrists. She walked the narrow hallway toward the holding cells, each step echoing louder in her mind. This wasn't the end for Monica Price, not by a long shot, but for Judge Wolf? Oh, his end had just begun. The metal door slammed shut behind Monica Price, sealing her inside a holding cell beneath the courthouse. The clang echoed, long and hollow, bouncing off the concrete walls like a warning. The air smelled of bleach and sweat, the kind of mix that clung to your skin no matter how hard you tried to shake it off. Her orange jumpsuit scratched against her arms as she sat down on a rusted bench, bolted to the wall, the cold from the metal seeping into her bones. She sat still, her back straight, her hands resting in her lap. But inside, Monica's mind raced like a freight train. This was supposed to be the easy part. Take the sentence, serve a few hours, then walk out when the FBI raided Judge Wolf's chambers and put him in cuffs. That was the plan. It had to be. Her handler, Elliot Banks, had reassured her just that morning. "We're ready," he'd said, his gravelly voice steady as a rock. By sundown, Wolf's empire comes crashing down. But sundown came, and Monica was still sitting there, still breathing in that stale, recycled air. The small, grimy window high on the wall let in a sliver of dying light as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, turning the cell gray and shadowed. She leaned back, her head resting against the wall, and let out a slow breath through her nose. She trusted Elliot. 6 years working together, through cartel busts in Miami, crooked cops in Chicago, and dirty judges in between. He always came through, but this time, something felt off. Wolf's look in the courtroom lingered in her mind. That moment when he leaned back, sipped his bourbon, and smirked like he knew something no one else did, like he'd caught a whiff of her secret. Monica's fingers tapped out a rhythm on her knee, steady and soft, a way to keep her mind anchored, to drown out the creeping unease clawing at her chest. She'd played the long game before. She knew how to wait. But this was supposed to be the moment they struck. Upstairs, in the judge's private chambers, Harrison Wolf leaned back in his leather chair, a glass of bourbon sweating in his hand. The walls were lined with oak shelves, filled with law books that hadn't been cracked in years. The soft glow from a desk lamp cast long shadows across the room. Wolf stared at Monica's case file, flipping through the thin stack of papers. It was flimsy, almost laughable. An assault charge, based on the testimony of a drunk who barely remembered the night. But that wasn't what bothered him. It was Monica herself. She hadn't begged. She hadn't pleaded for leniency. Hell, she hadn't even flinched when he dropped 15 years on her like a sledgehammer. That calm, steady stare she'd given him, like she knew the end game, like she knew something he didn't. That's what kept itching at the back of his mind. Wolf drained his glass and slammed it down on the desk, the clink echoing in the empty room. He buzzed the intercom. "Dixon," he barked. Footsteps thudded down the hallway. heavy and slow. Before the door creaked open, Trent Dixon, Wolf's enforcer, stepped inside, filling the doorway with his wide frame. His buzz cut glistened under the lamp's glow, a scar slicing across his jaw from some long-forgotten bar fight. "Something wrong, Judge?" Dixon asked, his voice rough like sandpaper. Wolf pushed the file across the desk. "Monica Price, I want you to dig deeper." "Something's off about her?" Dixon raised an eyebrow. "You think she's got a lawyer pulling strings?" "Maybe," Wolf muttered, his eyes narrowing. "Or maybe she's something else entirely. I don't like her calm. Too damn confident for someone about to rot in a cell." Dixon nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "I'll find out." Down in the holding cell, Monica stood and stretched her arms, shaking out the tension in her muscles. Hours had passed. The faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like bees in a jar. She paced the small cell, each step squeaking against the damp floor. The walls pressed in tighter with each lap. Where was Elliot? Where was the team? This wasn't supposed to take this long. Suddenly, the sound of boots echoed down the hallway. Monica's head snapped up. The rhythm wasn't familiar, not Elliot, not the FBI. No, this was someone else. The cell door groaned open, and a guard stepped in, thin and wiry, with a patchy beard and a sneer that stretched too wide across his face. "Price," he barked. "Hands out." Monica held out her wrists, keeping her face blank as he snapped on the cuffs with unnecessary force. He yanked her forward and shoved her down the hallway, past empty cells and flickering lights, toward the sally port. A van idled outside, its exhaust thick in the cool night air. She climbed in, her pulse quickening. This wasn't the plan. She was supposed to be extracted from the courthouse, not hauled off to the city jail like common trash. Something had gone sideways. As the van rumbled to life, Monica's mind raced. Had Wolf caught on? Was the FBI stalled? She replayed her cover story in her head. Monica Price, temp worker, no priors, clean as a whistle. The alias should hold. It always had before. But Wolf wasn't just another greedy judge. He was smart, careful, and if he suspected her, the whole operation could collapse before it even started. The van bumped along the cracked streets of New Orleans, the lights of the French Quarter flickering in the distance. Monica's jaw tightened. She'd spent 2 years burrowed into Wolf's rotten empire, 2 years pretending to be someone she wasn't, gathering dirt, planting bugs, piecing together a puzzle that could finally bring him down. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. She leaned back against the cold metal wall, the cuffs biting into her wrists, and stared out at the dark city rolling past. Whatever Wolf was planning, whatever cards he thought he held, he hadn't won yet. Not even close. The hum of the transport van's engine faded as it pulled into the Orleans Parish Jail, but Monica Price's pulse only roared louder in her ears. The steel cuffs clamped tight around her wrists, biting into her skin, felt heavier with each passing minute. She kept her face steady, her breathing even. But inside, the plan was unraveling. This wasn't the extraction point. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She felt the van lurch to a stop. The rear doors creaked open, and 2 guards stood there, one tall with a lazy sneer, the other shorter, built like a fire hydrant. Neither of them looked like they cared who she was or why she was here. They yanked her out roughly, boots echoing on the cracked pavement, as they marched her toward the intake building. Monica swallowed the rising unease. Stay calm. Stick to the cover. Elliot would sort this out. But miles across town, in the wood-paneled chambers of Judge Harrison Wolf, the gears were grinding in a different direction. Wolf leaned over his desk, the soft glow of his desk lamp casting shadows under his sharp cheekbones. His fingers tapped the edge of Monica's thin case file, eyes narrowed behind his glasses. He flipped the pages back and forth, like the answers might be hidden between the lines. Something about her didn't sit right, "Dixon?" he barked. Trent Dixon pushed open the heavy office door, stepping inside with a slight swagger, wiping sweat from his buzzed scalp with a rag. "Judge." Wolf didn't look up. "You get anything yet?" Dixon shrugged. "Not much. Files clean. Grew up in Baton Rouge. Community college dropout. Worked a string of temp jobs. Bounced around the city." Wolf's jaw tightened. No priors, nothing. That was what gnawed at him. No record. No screw-ups. Just clean. Too clean. Wolf sat back in his leather chair, the faint smell of bourbon clinging to the room. He stared at Dixon. "You believe in instincts, Trent." Dixon smirked. "You know I do. Then tell me why she didn't flinch." Wolf's voice dropped low, gravel thick. "I threw 15 years at her, and she stood there, like I handed her a parking ticket." Dixon didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew what that meant. Street trash didn't act like that. No one did, unless they had something else backing them. Something bigger. Wolf grabbed his phone, thumbing through his contacts. His network stretched deep into the police force, deeper still into the DA's office. He'd built it over decades, favors traded, backs scratched, files buried. He dialed a number. A gruff voice answered. "Yeah, run Monica Price." Dig deeper. Full history, every inch of it. No shortcuts. The man on the other end grumbled, but agreed. Wolf hung up, the smirk back on his lips. "If there's dirt," he muttered, "I'll find it." Back at the jail, Monica was processed like any other inmate. Fingerprints smeared onto paper. Mugshots snapped under harsh, fluorescent lights. The intake guard cracked a joke about her being too pretty for prison and laughed at his own wit while Monica stood there, stone-faced. She'd been here before, undercover, in worse places than this. She knew how to wear the mask, but the knot in her stomach twisted tighter. Wolf was too quiet. Hours passed. The concrete walls of her cell felt like they were pressing in, squeezing her thoughts thin. The high, grimy window showed nothing but a slice of black sky, no stars. And then, across town, Wolf's phone rang. Dixon's contact. "Judge, we got something." Wolf leaned forward, his bourbon glass sweating onto a stack of legal briefs. "Talk? Her driver's license? Issued 2 years ago. Got a duplicate number tied to a dead woman out in Lake Charles. Government glitch or federal cover." Wolf's grip tightened around the phone. His pulse quickened. "Federal." He knew that smell. "Feds," he muttered, standing and pacing the length of his office. "She's playing me." Dixon cracked his knuckles, leaning in the doorway. "You sure?" Wolf turned, eyes blazing. "I'm damn sure." He hung up and buzzed his contact at the jail. "Triple her bail," he snapped. "No visitors, no calls. Lock her down." The voice on the other end hesitated. "Triple? That's a stretch, Judge." "She's small time." Wolf's voice dropped to a growl. "Do it, or I'll find someone who will." The phone clicked. Silence, filling the space between them. Monica felt it before she heard it. The shift in the air, the way the guards glanced at her, like she was wearing a target instead of a jumpsuit. When the new paperwork slid under her cell door, $500,000 bail, cash only, she knew Wolf wasn't playing anymore. His claws were out. She paced, her sneakers scraping the concrete, her mind racing. Elliot had to move now. The window was closing. In the courthouse chambers, Wolf poured himself another drink, the ice clinking softly in the glass. Dixon leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. "She's too calm," Wolf said again, his voice quieter now, but no less dangerous. "I want her buried. You understand me?" Dixon nodded. "I'll find the cracks." Wolf turned toward the window, staring out at the New Orleans skyline, the lights flickering like fireflies. He could feel the walls closing in, feds sniffing around. His empire, built on backroom deals and rigged trials, was under threat. But he'd been in this game too long to lose now. He wouldn't go down easy. "She wants to play with fire?" Wolf muttered, sipping his bourbon. "I'll show her what a real blaze feels like." Back in her cell, Monica stared at the cold steel door, her reflection faint in its dull surface. Wolf had made his move. The game was on, and she was ready to play. The nights in Orleans Parish Jail are long, the kind of long that makes minutes stretch into hours and hours feel like days. Monica Price sat on the edge of her cot, the thin mattress sagging beneath her weight, the cold steel frame pressing into her back. The walls around her, stained with years of sweat and regret, seemed to close in tighter with every breath, but Monica stayed still, calm, at least on the outside. Inside, that fire was burning hotter. The bail notice sat in her lap like an insult. $500,000. Cash only. Wolf's move. She'd expected him to react, maybe stall the investigation. But this was a full court press. He wasn't just suspicious, he was on the hunt. And Monica? She was his prey. But she wasn't alone. Elliot Banks was out there. She knew him, trusted him. For 6 years, they'd been tearing down corrupt empires from the inside out. They'd toppled drug lords, busted up smuggling rings, taken down more than one dirty cop. And every time, Elliot came through. Always. But this time, this silence, it wasn't like him. Monica leaned back, resting her head against the cool concrete wall. She closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing. Steady and even. She had to believe the plan was still in motion, that the FBI team was working behind the scenes, tightening the noose around Wolf's neck. But Wolf wasn't wasting time. Across town, in the quiet of his chambers, Judge Harrison Wolf stood at his window, sipping bourbon, staring down at the streets of New Orleans like he owned them. And, in a way, he did. For 30 years, he'd built his kingdom brick by brick, favors traded for silence, sentences sold to the highest bidder. He didn't just hand out justice, he sold it. But now, something was off. That woman, Monica Price, she didn't fit the mold. She stood there in his courtroom, taking a 15-year sentence like it was just another day at the office. No fear, no desperation, just calm. Wolf turned from the window, setting his glass down hard enough to make the ice clink. He buzzed Dixon, status. Dixon's voice crackled through the speaker. "She's locked down tight. No calls, no visitors. Just like you said, good. Keep it that way." But Wolf wasn't done. His mind turned, gears grinding. He needed to know more. If Monica Price was a Fed, she wouldn't be alone. And if there were others, they'd come for her. Wolf picked up his phone, dialing another number. The warden at Orleans Parish. "I want her isolated," Wolf said, his voice like steel, segregated from the general population. The warden hesitated. "Judge, that's not standard protocol. She's a non-violent." Wolf cut him off. "Do it." And so they did. Monica felt the shift as soon as the guard opened her cell door. Two of them, faces hard, no word spoken. They cuffed her wrists and led her down the corridor, past rows of cells where inmates watched with hollow eyes, curiosity mixing with hunger. They took her to a different wing. Solitary, no voices here, just silence, and the hum of fluorescent lights. The new cell was smaller, the bed thinner. No window this time, just 4 gray walls and a steel door with a slot for meals. The air was colder, thick with mildew and something else, fear. They left her there, alone. Monica sat down slowly, her back to the wall, her knees pulled up to her chest. She'd been through worse, undercover in cartel territory, walking the line between survival and discovery. She could handle this, she told herself that over and over. But Wolf wasn't finished tightening the screws. Across the city, Dixon sat in a dimly lit basement office, stacks of files littering the desk. He leaned back in his chair, cracking his knuckles, staring at Monica's file. Her story held up, but that driver's license glitch? That was something. Dixon made a call to an old buddy still on the force, a cop, who owed him a favor or two. "Run the name again," Dixon growled. "Top to bottom." "I want everything," the cop grumbled but agreed. And by the time the report came back, Dixon had what he needed. No smoking gun, but enough to stoke Wolf's paranoia, enough to keep Monica buried. Back in solitary, Monica felt time slip away. No clock, no sense of day or night, just the faint buzz of lights and the occasional shuffle of guards outside her door. She kept her mind busy, replaying every piece of evidence she'd planted. The bugs in Wolf's golf bag, the recorder tucked behind the law books in his office, the fake bribe receipts slipped into his desk drawers. It was all there, waiting. The FBI just needed to move. And yet, nothing. She paced, her sneakers scuffing against the concrete floor, her fists clenched, then relaxed. Over and over, she counted steps, counted breaths, anything to keep her head clear. But when the slot in her door opened, and a new notice slid through another charge, smuggling contraband into the jail, her blood ran cold. Wolf was playing dirty, planting more evidence, building a case that would bury her so deep even the FBI might struggle to dig her out. Monica picked up the paper, her hands steady even as her heart pounded. She folded it, tucked it under the mattress, and sat back down. She knew the game. She'd played it before. But this wasn't just about taking down Wolf. This was survival. And as much as Wolf thought he was ahead, Monica Price wasn't out of moves yet. The walls of solitary confinement have a way of pressing on your chest, making it hard to breathe, like the air itself is trying to break you. Monica Price sat in that windowless box, knees drawn up, arms folded tight, her back against the cold concrete. It had been 2 days, maybe 3, since they moved her here. Hard to tell time when the lights never changed, when the only sound was the low, constant hum of electricity. But Monica wasn't the kind to break. Even as Judge Wolf tightened the noose, adding new charges, trying to bury her alive in that hole, she stayed sharp. She knew how to play the long game. She'd been undercover too long not to. Still, something felt wrong. Too much time had passed. Elliot Banks should have made his move by now. The FBI had every piece they needed: bugs planted in Wolf's chambers, hidden cameras recording his dirty dealings, bank records tracing bribes straight to his accounts. The walls should have been closing in on Wolf, but instead, they were closing in on her. She stood, pacing the length of the tiny cell, 10 steps one way, 10 back. Her sneakers squeaked against the floor. She counted her breaths, keeping the rhythm steady. That's what you did to stay sane. You built a routine. You kept your mind busy, because when you stopped, that's when the walls started to win. Across town, Elliot Banks sat behind the wheel of an unmarked sedan, parked outside the FBI field office, his scarred cheek twitching as he stared down at his phone. No new messages. No updates. The warrants to raid Wolf's chambers were still sitting in some bureaucrat's inbox, tangled in red tape, delayed, denied, blocked by some judge who owed Wolf too many favors. Elliot slammed a fist against the steering wheel, the sound sharp in the silence of the car. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Monica was in there, playing her part, taking the fall, and the system was choking on its own corruption. He picked up his phone again, calling in favors, pushing harder, but every door slammed shut. Back at the jail, Monica heard the shuffle of boots outside her door. She stood still, back straight, jaw set. The meal slot opened, and a familiar face leaned in. It was the young guard, no older than 22. Acne scars across his chin, eyes too soft for this place. He was new, still human beneath the uniform. Monica had seen it in him during intake, when he flinched at the rough hands of the others, when he muttered apologies under his breath. She stepped closer to the door, lowering her voice. "You got a pen?" The kid blinked, Glancing down the hall, then back at her, he fished into his pocket and pulled out a stubby pencil, sliding it through the slot. Monica tore a strip from her bedsheet, wrapped it tight around her finger, then scribbled a coded message, just a few words. A cipher only Elliot would understand. C. Planting. D. Move fast. T. She folded the strip, held it out through the slot. Get this to Agent Elliot Banks, she said, her voice soft but sharp. FBI. It's life or death. The kid hesitated, the weight of the ask sinking in. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, but then he took the strip, slipping it into his sleeve. I'll try, he whispered. Don't try, Monica snapped, her eyes locked on his. Do it, he nodded, stepping away. The door slamming shut behind him, the silence returned, but Monica's pulse stayed steady. She'd cracked the system once before she could do it again. Now it was up to Elliot. And Elliot? He was ready. 2 hours later, a knock on the window of his sedan startled him. The kid stood there, pale and nervous, eyes darting around like the whole city was watching. I got something for you, he muttered, slipping the strip of cloth through the cracked window. Elliot unfolded it, scanning the crude writing, his heart racing as the cipher clicked in his head. It was Monica. She was still standing, still fighting. He didn't waste a second. He called his second-in-command, Carla Vance, her voice sharp on the other end. We move now, Elliot barked. No more waiting. Wolf's buried too deep in this city. We go in warrants or not. Carla hesitated, but only for a second. I'm in. As night fell over New Orleans, Elliot's team moved, covert, quiet. They hit Wolf's chambers just before midnight, slipping through the courthouse like shadows. They tore through his desk, cracked open his filing cabinets, pulled the bugs Monica had planted. Every damning piece of evidence laid bare. Bank statements, bribe ledgers, audio tapes of Wolf promising leniency for cash. His voice smooth and arrogant. Elliot's pulse raced. They had him. Finally. But Wolf wasn't sitting idle. In his chambers, sipping bourbon, he watched the news flicker across his TV headlines, painting Monica as a violent gang leader, smuggling contraband into jail, attacking guards. His media machine had done its work. The public didn't see Monica Price, federal agent. They saw a criminal, locked up where she belonged. Wolf smirked, his eyes glinting. Let's see the feds dig her out of that. But across town, Elliot wasn't playing defense. He leaked Wolf's sentencing records to a local journalist. 20 years for black defendants, caught with a dime bag of weed. Probation for white executives, caught embezzling millions. The numbers screamed injustice. By dawn, the story hit. Social media exploded. Free Monica Price. Expose Wolf. Protests gathered outside the courthouse. Signs waving, voices rising. Monica's story was out. The people were listening. But inside solitary, Monica couldn't hear the chants, couldn't see the signs. She sat on the cold steel bed, her breathing steady, her heart thudding with quiet hope. She knew Elliot would come through, and when the guard returned, this time with a hint of fear in his eyes, Monica smiled. The tide was turning. The morning sun hadn't even warmed the streets of New Orleans before the protests outside the courthouse began to swell. What started as a dozen voices chanting for justice had grown overnight into hundreds. People held signs that read #Free Monica Price and Stop Wolf's Corruption, their voices echoing off the marble walls. Judge Harrison Wolf had long considered his fortress. But Wolf? He wasn't worried. Not yet. Inside his chambers, with the blinds drawn tight and the hum of the TV low, Wolf paced like a man sharpening a blade. His empire wasn't just built on court rulings and bribes. It was built on fear. Fear of what he could do if you crossed him. And fear doesn't crack so easily. But this noise outside? It was getting too loud. Wolf stood by the window, peeking through the slats. He saw the crowd pressing in on the courthouse steps, the chants rising like a wave, and his jaw clenched. He could feel it, the public turning, the walls of his kingdom trembling. Dixon! He barked into his phone, time to squeeze back. Trent Dixon was already waiting for the call. In a basement far from the cameras and microphones, he sat surrounded by stacks of old files and fresh ammunition. He cracked his knuckles, the scars across his hands tugging tight. "How deep we going, Judge?" Dixon asked. Though he already knew, Wolf's voice lowered, cold as steel, deep enough to drown her. The pressure wasn't working fast enough. The feds had raided his office. Yes, but Wolf still had allies. He still had leverage. And when leverage starts to slip, you pull out the big guns. So Wolf made another call, not to the courthouse, not to the DA's office, but to the darker corners of Louisiana, to men who didn't need a badge to carry out orders. The call went to a militia leader, Nathan Clay, head of a group known as the Southern Guard, a paramilitary outfit that called themselves patriots but lived for the fight. Their ideals were soaked in hate, their guns ready to answer Wolf's call. "Nathan," Wolf said smoothly, "I've got a situation, some outside agitators stirring up trouble." Clay grunted on the other end. "How much?" 10,000. "Half now, half after?" Clay laughed. "Consider it done." That was Wolf's playbook. When the law wasn't enough, when the system started to buckle, he turned to those who worked outside it. The kind of men who saw protests as invitations to violence. And as the protests swelled in front of the courthouse, Wolf's militia marched quietly into the city. No uniforms, no flags. Just men with heavy boots and heavier intentions. Monica Price, locked in solitary, didn't hear the wheels turning outside her concrete box. But she could feel it. She felt the shift in the air every time the guards passed her door. Their eyes darker, their glares longer. Something was brewing. When they finally opened the door to her cell, 2 guards stood there, faces blank. "Price," one of them growled. "Let's go." She stood, shoulders squared, her heart pounding, steady but strong. They led her down the hallway, past the other cells, past the hollow eyes that watched from behind the bars. But instead of heading toward the courtyard or visitation, they marched her deeper into the jail, toward the intake room. The lights buzzed overhead as a guard shoved her against the wall, snapping on cuffs tighter than needed. "Fresh charges," the guard sneered. "Possession with intent to distribute. Life sentence territory." Monica turned her head, locking eyes with him, calm, controlled. "That's not mine. Tell it to the judge," he spat back. Monica's mind spun. Another plant, another layer to bury her. Wolf wasn't just stalling, he was fighting back harder. As the new charges were typed up, the system spinning out lies faster than truth could catch up. Wolf stood in his office, sipping his bourbon with a grin. His militia dogs were already prowling the city, ready to turn peaceful protests into battlegrounds. But the public? They weren't backing down. The next morning, the courthouse steps were packed with over 1,000 protesters. Signs waved. Voices rose higher. The media cameras zoomed in, hungry for a headline. Corruption in the courts. Judge under fire. The stories were gaining traction, even as Wolf tried to paint Monica as a criminal mastermind. Elliot Banks, watching from the sidelines, felt the shift. His scarred cheek twitched as he paced behind the crowd, staying out of sight, but close enough to hear the chants. He knew Wolf's game. He'd seen men like him before, cornered animals that bite harder when they're scared. And Wolf? He was terrified. But Wolf had one more move. Late that night, Nathan Clay and his militia rolled into town, blending into the streets like shadows. They stirred the pot, picked fights with protesters, threw the first punches, then blamed the crowd. And when the chaos broke out, the headlines shifted. Riots in New Orleans. Wolf watched the news, smirking as the story bent back in his favor. But even then, his hands weren't clean. Behind the scenes, Wolf fed the media lies, spinning Monica's story into a cautionary tale about crime and punishment. Inside her solitary cell, Monica heard the faint buzz of the television in the hallway, news reports painting her as a kingpin, footage of the protests twisted into scenes of chaos. Wolf was flipping the script, turning her fight for justice into a battle for survival. But Monica? She wasn't backing down. She sat back against the wall, fists clenched, eyes burning with the fire Wolf couldn't smother. She knew Elliot was out there. She knew the people were still chanting her name. And she knew Wolf was running out of moves, because no matter how hard he fought, no matter how deep he buried her under false charges and militia violence, Monica Price had one thing Wolf never did: the truth. And it was coming for him. The morning fog rolled heavy over the Mississippi, blanketing New Orleans in a gray hush. But inside the FBI field office, there was no quiet, only the low hum of urgency, of agents moving like shadows through hallways lit by flickering fluorescent lights. Elliot Banks sat at the center of it, hunched over a cluttered table, files splayed out, his scarred cheek twitching as his eyes scanned document after document. His knuckles were white, fists clenched tight around a pen that hadn't touched paper in hours. They had enough, more than enough. Bank ledgers, audio tapes, emails. Monica's work had built a case so strong it should have shattered Judge Wolf's empire in a day. But this city? This system? It wasn't built for easy wins. Every piece of evidence was another brick that Wolf tried to wall off, calling in favors, stalling the warrants, twisting the media's story until up felt like down. But today, Elliot wasn't waiting on anyone. He picked up the recorder Monica had planted, the faint hiss of static whispering from the device before Wolf's voice rolled through, smooth and smug, promises made behind closed doors, deals struck in secret. Elliot slammed the stop button, his jaw set hard. No more stalling. Carla Vance, his second in command, leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, her brow furrowed beneath a mess of jet-black curls. "We can't sit on this any longer," Elliot growled, pushing back from the table. "Wolf's turned this whole damn city into his playground." Carla nodded. "The militia, the planted charges, the media circus, he's got the story on his side." Elliot stood, grabbing the files, the tapes, the digital drives, everything. Then we flipped the story. Before noon, they moved. Covert, but bold enough to make a statement. Elliot led his team back into Wolf's chambers, kicking open drawers, pulling out the ledgers Monica had risked everything to plant. Thick, leather-bound books filled with names, dates, amounts, every dirty deal, every payout. Some pages stained with bourbon rings, others smudged with fingerprints that would tie Wolf to corruption so deep, even his oldest allies would flinch. The walls of Wolf's office, once lined with law books and degrees, now looked like the last stand of a desperate man, and Elliot's team made sure every corner was stripped bare. Across town, Wolf sat in his high-rise condo, bourbon in hand, eyes glued to the newsfeed on his television. Protesters still swarmed outside the courthouse, louder than ever. The militia he'd brought in to stir chaos had only fueled the fire, and now the crowd wasn't just demanding Monica's release. They wanted Wolf's head. But Wolf wasn't worried. Not yet. His media machine was still spinning, pumping out stories that painted Monica as a criminal mastermind. Footage of the protests edited into violent clashes. Headlines that screamed law and order under siege. He sipped his bourbon, savoring the illusion of control, until his phone rang. It wasn't Dixon, wasn't one of his inside men. It was his lawyer. "Ray," the voice crackled, panicked. "They raided your chambers again. The feds aren't waiting anymore." Wolf's grip tightened around his glass, the knuckles of his free hand whitening. "They have the ledgers," the lawyer continued. "Audio, records. It's out of our hands." For the first time in weeks, Wolf's smirk faded. His fortress was cracking, but he wasn't done. Back at the field office, Elliot moved fast. The evidence was too hot to sit on. He leaked the ledgers to a local journalist, someone who hadn't yet been bought or silenced. Within hours, screenshots spread like wildfire. Wolf's signature on payouts to prison CEOs, cops, politicians. Bribes that kept the machine turning. By nightfall, New Orleans lit up with the story. Social media exploded. Protesters outside the courthouse doubled in size, their voices roaring through the streets. But Monica? She still sat in that concrete box, alone, cut off from the outside world. She couldn't hear the chants, couldn't see the tide turning. She only felt the weight of Wolf's game pressing down harder. When the guards marched into her cell that night, their faces grim, she knew something had shifted. They didn't speak, just cuffed her wrists tighter than before and dragged her back to the intake room. A new charge, another layer to bury her. Bribing a corrections officer. 5 more years. Monica kept her face blank, but inside, her blood boiled. Wolf was throwing everything he had, twisting every tool of the system to bury her deeper, but she knew Elliot was out there, fighting to drag her back into the light. And Elliot? He wasn't finished yet. The next morning, Elliot stood outside the courthouse, blending into the crowd as chants echoed around him, his hood pulled low, his eyes scanning the sea of signs and fists raised high. Free Monica Price. Expose Wolf. He slipped between protesters, passing files hand to hand, copies of Wolf's sentencing records. The disparities were sickening. Black men serving 20 years for a single joint. White businessmen walking free after embezzling millions. The crowd roared louder as the truth spread. And Wolf? He felt the walls closing in. Inside his condo, Wolf stood at the window, watching the protest swell beneath him. His phone buzzed. Another call. Another ally bailing on him. Campaign donors pulling back. Judges distancing themselves. The web he'd spun for decades was unraveling thread by thread. But Wolf wasn't done. His eyes narrowed as he turned from the window, pouring another drink. If they want a war, he muttered, I'll give them one. Back in her cell, Monica sat still, breathing slow, steady. She couldn't hear the crowd, couldn't see the cracks forming in Wolf's empire. But she felt it. The weight on her chest, the grip around her throat, it was loosening. Piece by piece. She closed her eyes, her fists unclenching, her heart steady. The fight wasn't over, but the tide, it was turning. The streets of New Orleans felt like a battlefield. Protesters packed the courthouse steps, their chants echoing down Royal Street, louder than ever before. Signs waved, fists rose, voices carried into the night like a storm rolling through the city. Free Monica Price wasn't just a hashtag anymore. It was a movement, and Judge Harrison Wolf felt the ground shaking beneath him. But when power starts to slip through a man's fingers, he doesn't let go. He squeezes harder. In the quiet of his condo, the blinds drawn tight against the growing noise outside, Wolf paced like a caged animal. His bourbon glass trembled in his hand, the ice melting faster than he could drink. His empire, built on decades of backroom deals and courtroom rulings, was starting to crack. The feds had the ledgers. The protesters had the story. But Wolf? He still had his claws. Dixon, he snapped into the phone. I want more dirt. She's too clean, too perfect. There's got to be something else. Trent Dixon, lounging in the dark of a basement bar, cracked his knuckles and leaned forward, his buzzed head catching the flicker of a neon beer sign. She's just a temp worker on paper, Dixon growled. But I'll keep digging. Wolf slammed his glass down, the sound sharp and final. Dig deeper. And so Dixon did. He pulled favors from old contacts, called in debts from cops who owed him more than just a drink, and late one night, Flipping through records that hadn't seen daylight in years, he found it, a thin, frayed thread. An old traffic ticket tied to Monica Price's alias, but cross, reference to a federal database. A duplicate, a glitch, too clean, too precise. The kind of mistake only someone deep undercover could afford. Dixon grinned, picking up the phone. "Boss? You were right. She's not just anybody. She's a Fed." Wolf's heart hammered as the words sank in. He'd suspected, sure, but now he knew. She wasn't just a pawn in his courtroom. She was the threat, the snake in his garden. And snakes? Wolf knew how to crush those. Back in her solitary cell, Monica felt the shift before it hit. The air seemed heavier, the glances from guards sharper. When they came for her, two guards, hard-faced and silent, she knew they weren't just moving her for exercise. They led her down the winding halls, past the echoes of distant shouts, to the intake room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as they shoved her into a chair, snapping the cuffs on tighter than ever before. "Fresh charges," one of the guards sneered. "Bribing an officer." 5 more years. Monica's jaw tightened, but her face stayed still. Controlled. Calculated. Wolf was grasping, throwing everything he had to bury her. But the news outside? It was working against him. Elliot Banks and Carla Vance stood at the center of the growing storm, pushing harder, leaking more. The sentencing records, the ledgers they'd lit a fire under New Orleans. And now, the city roared back. Protests swelled to thousands. National media swarmed the courthouse, reporters pressing into the crowd, their cameras catching every chant, every raised fist. The public wasn't just asking questions, they were demanding answers. But Wolf? He wasn't done fighting dirty. Late that night, he made another call. To Nathan Clay, the militia leader who'd stirred chaos once before. Wolf leaned over his desk, his voice low and steady. "She's a Fed. The protests are swelling. I want this stopped." Clay chuckled, the sound like gravel sliding over steel. "We'll bring the heat." And they did. As the sun rose over New Orleans, the protests outside the courthouse turned into chaos. Wolf's militia slipped in like shadows, blending into the crowd until they were close enough to strike. A punch thrown here, a shove there, flares tossed into the street. And when the police arrived, they didn't stop the men with torches they turned on the protesters. The headlines changed overnight. Riots erupt outside courthouse. Wolf sat back, sipping his bourbon, watching the footage play out on the news. Protesters clashing with police. Fires burning in trash cans. Chaos. And Monica? She sat alone, cut off. The weight of Wolf's lies pressing down harder. But Elliot wasn't standing still. He slipped into the crowd as the protests swelled again, working behind the scenes, passing documents, hand to hand, more proof, more fire, every sentencing discrepancy, every bribe laid bare. The city wasn't blind. They saw Wolf for who he was, and when the militia struck again, this time trying to turn the protests into a full-blown riot, Elliot leaked it all. Photos of the men stirring violence. Names tied back to Wolf's donors. The story bent back again. The people, they weren't backing down. And Wolf? He felt it. The walls closing in. But he wasn't done. He called Dixon again, his voice rough, shaking. "She's a Fed, and she's too dangerous to leave breathing." Dixon leaned forward, licking his lips. "What do you want me to do?" Wolf stared out at the city, the protests swelling like waves below his window. "Find her weak spot. Make it hurt." Back in solitary, Monica sat still, her breathing slow, steady. She couldn't hear the chants outside, couldn't feel the movement building. But she knew. She felt the pressure tightening, the game shifting. Wolf was running scared. And that was her advantage. Night settled over New Orleans, like a heavy blanket. But the city didn't sleep. Protesters still lined the courthouse steps, their chants echoing down the streets, blending with the sound of distant sirens. The city was boiling, simmering with anger and hope, caught in the pull of something bigger than a single courtroom. But inside the stone walls of Orleans Parish Jail, Monica Price sat in silence, her world reduced to a 6 by 8 foot box, the hum of fluorescent lights her only company. She didn't know the protests had doubled in size again. She couldn't hear the chants that carried her name, couldn't see the headlines splashed across every TV screen in Louisiana. But what she felt, the tension, the shift in the air that told her everything. Judge Wolf wasn't winning. Not yet. But he wasn't done fighting either. When the guards came that evening, their faces wore a different kind of cold. There was no taunting, no sneers, just a rough hand snapping the cuffs onto her wrists and dragging her down the hall, through the guts of the jail, into the intake room again. Another charge, another layer to bury her. But this time, Monica didn't just sit there. She leaned forward, stared straight into the guard's eyes, and spoke softly. "Tell Judge Wolf," she said. "He's running out of time." The guard flinched, just for a second. Enough. Back across town, in the heart of the FBI field office, Elliot Banks wasn't sleeping either. His eyes were bloodshot. His scarred cheek twitched as he scrolled through files on his laptop. Wolf's bribe ledgers, sentencing records, taped conversations. They had enough to bury the judge a dozen times over. But Wolf had something stronger than evidence. He had influence, strings that reached deep into the legal system, pulling at judges, cops, even federal agents. Every move Elliot made, Wolf countered. Every story they leaked, Wolf spun his way. But Elliot wasn't just playing defense. He knew Wolf's house of cards couldn't hold forever. And now, it was time to bring it down. He picked up his burner phone, his fingers tapping out a message to Monica's sympathetic guard, the young one with eyes too soft for this kind of job. A simple question: can she still move? The reply came fast. Yes, but they're tightening. Elliot leaned back, rubbing the stubble on his chin. Time to strike. He turned to Carla Vance, standing in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "Get the files ready," he growled. "We're going public. All of it." The plan was simple. Hack Wolf's private email server, pull every dirty secret, every message tied to militia groups, every conversation that could sink him in front of the world. Monica had planted a backdoor into Wolf's system months ago, posing as a low-level worker, slipping code into his network that sat quiet, waiting. Elliot activated it now, tapping into the server, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Lines of code danced across the screen until Wolf's inbox popped open. And there it was. Messages from militia leaders. Nathan Clay promising to stir chaos, demanding more money. Wolf's replies, smug and confident. Payments made to cover up assaults. Payouts to spin media coverage. Back and forth exchanges with allies pulling strings inside the DA's office. Elliot grinned, cold and sharp. "This is it," he muttered. He packaged the emails, the ledgers, the recordings, and fired them off to every journalist, every media outlet, every activist group screaming for justice. By dawn, the story was everywhere. Judge Wolf's secret emails, leak militia ties, bribes, cover-ups. Screenshots flooded social media. The protests swelled into the thousands. Cameras rolled as crowds blocked the courthouse doors, their chants echoing louder than ever. Monica Price wasn't just a woman in a cell anymore. She was a symbol. But Wolf? He wasn't down yet. In his high-rise condo, his silver hair slicked back, Wolf sat watching the news unfold, his bourbon glass forgotten on the table. Victor Dixon paced behind him, muttering curses under his breath. "They've got everything," Dixon growled. "Emails, ledgers, they're tearing you apart." Wolf's jaw clenched. He stared at the screen as protesters waved signs with his name smeared across them. But even now, with the walls closing in, Wolf still had claws. He picked up his phone, calling Nathan Clay one more time. "She's still breathing," Wolf snapped. "That's the problem," Clay laughed. "You want the protests stopped." "No," Wolf hissed. "I want her gone." Clay's militia moved fast, descending on the protest lines like wolves in the dark, but this time the cameras caught everything: militia members hurling bottles, starting fires, picking fights with protesters. The footage spread even faster than Wolf's lies. The people didn't back down. They pushed back harder. And Wolf? He felt the walls of his empire shudder again. But across the city, Monica sat in her cell, feeling the shift. The guards were on edge, their movements sharper, their voices hushed when they passed her door. Something was happening. Then, the soft knock came a different rhythm. The young guard slipped a folded note through the slot. "You're winning," Monica smiled. Just a flicker, but it was enough. The fire burned hotter now. Wolf could throw everything he had: charges, militia, media spin. But the truth, it was coming for him. And this time, it wasn't going to stop. The night that should have broken her turned into the night that broke him. Judge Harrison Wolf sat in his condo. The city of New Orleans burning outside his window, not in flames, but in outrage. His name was smeared across every headline, his emails exposed, his ties to the militia laid bare for the world to see. His empire of fear, built over decades, was collapsing. But Wolf? He wasn't finished yet. He poured himself another bourbon, the glass shaking slightly in his grip. He stared at the television screen, watching the protests swell to thousands. They were chanting Monica Price's name, now like a war cry. But he still had one more move, one last desperate hand to play. He leaned forward, dialing a number burned into his memory. Nathan Clay, the militia leader who'd caused chaos in the streets before, who'd blended into the crowd like a shadow. But this time, Wolf's voice shook with venom. "She's winning," Wolf snarled. "Burn it down. Whatever it takes," Clay laughed, rough and low. "You want me to turn the city upside down?" "No," Wolf growled. "I want her gone." And that's when the plan twisted darker. But Wolf didn't stop there. He called one more ally, a hacker, someone he'd kept on retainer for years. Someone who knew how to find what the feds wanted to keep hidden. "Track the FBI's Safe House network," Wolf ordered. "Find out where they're keeping her." The hacker hesitated. "That's risky." "I don't care," Wolf snapped. "You do this, or you're done." Within hours, Wolf had the coordinates in his hand. Monica Price was tucked away in a federal safe house just outside the city, resting, recovering, thinking the war was nearly over. She didn't know Wolf had slipped the leash. The night was thick with humidity when Wolf made his next call, this time to a rogue SWAT captain he'd owned for years, another man with dirt to hide. "She's in a safe house," Wolf said. "You know what to do." At 3 a.m., the quiet of the safe house shattered as the front door exploded inward. Flashbangs lit the room in violent bursts. Armed men stormed inside, shouting orders, rifles raised. Monica barely had time to react, diving behind a couch, dragging Elliot Banks with her. The air filled with the sharp crack of gunfire, glass shattering around them. "FBI! Stand down!" Elliot shouted, but it didn't matter. This wasn't law enforcement. This was Wolf's last strike. Monica's mind raced. She could hear the shouting outside, boots pounding across the floorboards. She grabbed a broken shard of glass from the shattered window, slicing through the cuffs that bound her wrists. Her heartbeat thundered as she ducked through the back door, zigzagging into the darkness, the trees swallowing her whole. Elliot stayed behind, firing back, giving her time to run, but the SWAT team was relentless, their shouts chasing her into the night. Monica stumbled through the woods, her legs aching, the cut on her calf tearing open again as she pushed through brush and thorns. The safe house was gone. The protection was gone. Wolf had turned her sanctuary into a war zone. She crouched low in a ditch, mud seeping into her torn jumpsuit, her breath ragged. She listened, heard the trucks rolling away. The silence afterward felt like a taunt, but she wasn't dead. Not yet. Across town, Wolf watched the footage on a smuggled phone, a smug grin twisting his face. The safe house was rubble. Monica was gone, hunted in the dark. "She's finished," Wolf muttered. But Monica was a survivor. She knew how to disappear. She'd done it before. And now? She was more determined than ever. She tapped into every resource she had left. A burner phone from a homeless contact, a back-alley network of people who owed her favors. She reached out to Elliot, battered but alive, regrouping with what was left of the FBI team. But Wolf had crossed the final line. Monica wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting to end him. With Elliot's help, they turned the last piece of the puzzle into a weapon: Wolf's militia ties, his hidden accounts, his dirty money funneled through shell companies. They packaged it all, streaming it live to the world. And the world? It responded. The governor, under public pressure, issued a warrant for Wolf's arrest. No more protection, no more hiding. But Wolf, desperate and cornered, made one last move. He targeted Monica's family. Her mother's house, a small brick home in the 9th Ward, where the lights flickered softly in the front window, became the next battlefield. Wolf's men rigged it with explosives, ready to erase the last piece of Monica's world, but she got there first. The red light on the bomb blinked fast beneath the porch, wires snaking like veins. Monica dropped to her knees, sweat stinging her eyes, her fingers steady as they clipped the wires one by one until the timer froze. 5 seconds left. She stood, breathing hard, the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. And that's when Wolf stepped out of the shadows, his silver hair wild, his pistol gleaming in the dark, Victor Dixon looming behind him with a shotgun cradled in his arms. "This ends tonight." Wolf spat. Monica raised her hands, but the fire in her eyes never flickered. She wasn't the scared temp worker he thought he'd broken. She was the woman who'd torn his empire down. Sirens wailed in the distance, red and blue lights flashing through the night. "You lose," she whispered. Wolf's smirk faded. Feds stormed the scene, guns drawn, voices sharp. Dixon dropped his weapon, cuffed and dragged away. Wolf resisted, screaming curses, thrashing until the steel snapped around his wrists. But even then, Wolf had one last card. As they hauled him to the van, cameras rolling, Monica watched him grin. "See you in court." But this time, the courtroom wouldn't be his kingdom. It would be his tomb. Sometimes, the fight for justice isn't quick or clean. It's a long, brutal road filled with obstacles, betrayals, and moments where giving up feels easier. But stories like Monica Price's remind us, when the system is broken, it takes courage to stand against it. It takes resilience to keep pushing forward, even when the walls are closing in. For those of us who've lived long enough to see the cracks in the foundation, to witness the slow grind of justice, we know real change doesn't come overnight. It comes from persistence, from people willing to risk everything to expose the truth. And sometimes the cost is high. But here's the lesson: silence only protects the powerful. Speaking up, even when your voice shakes, can shake the very ground they stand on. So wherever you are, however old you are, remember this: your voice still matters, your fight still counts, and standing up for what's right? That's how we leave a legacy that lasts. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes in justice. Together, we can keep the fire burning, one voice, one story at a time.